Okay, welcome. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, or good night, wherever or whenever you are. It's morning here. And for my guest this week, Erich Phillips, it is afternoon.
It is late afternoon, so it's time for a beer.
Oh, right. Well, it's still too early here for me to have a beer, unfortunately.
But depends on the time.
Yeah, it's 9 a.m. in the morning here, so I think it's too much. Anyway, so as you've understand, there is a bit of a time difference because Erich is in Cambodia. He's in Phnom Penh. He's one of the, I think it's fair to say, one of the pioneers of the craft beer scene over there. Would that be fair?
I appreciate that title, but I don't know if I would say that myself. I'm just one of the guys.
Okay. But you did start like one of the first breweries there, isn't it? Cerevisia is like it's the first 3 or 4, I think.
In 2013, we started. Really, we were the first ones to distribute craft beer. There were a few other folks who had pub breweries at the time, but they weren't looking at sharing their beers with other restaurants or in the community. They were just looking at focused at their restaurant. So we were the first ones to distribute outside.
Okay. And I suppose before we talk about Cambodia beer scene and things, how did you end up in this situation where you were starting a brewery in Cambodia? What's the background?
Sure. There's a long story and the short story, so I'll give you kind of the medium one. My wife and I, we like to travel. About 13 years ago, we decided to leave the U.S., not because we were trying to escape or run away, but just looking for adventure. And we ended up going to China first.
Okay.
That was a great experience for us. After 3 years, we kind of said, what's next? And Cambodia was something that we had never experienced before. Southeast Asia was something we were excited to visit and live. Usually we were thinking 1 to 2 years, but Cambodia just wrapped their arms around us and we just fell in love with it. So 10 years later, we've started the business, or we have had business since then.
Right.
Starting the beer business for us, for my partner and I was looking for beer in Cambodia, craft beer, and I couldn't find it in 2013. So what I did find were good friends. And those friends, we started making our own beer, really just as a hobby.
Okay, so home brewing.
Mm-hmm. And every Sunday we were making beer. But what that meant was on Saturday night, we had to empty kegs in order to brew beer the next day.
Okay.
So those Saturday nights, we would have keg cleaning parties at my friend's house, which really entailed inviting members of the community to come over and taste and drink and finish a keg. And throughout the months, we were making beer just for ourselves and friends. Some of those guests were owners of restaurants and hotels. They encouraged us to make it more commercial.
Okay.
And that's kind of how we moved from something which was hobby to more commercial. And we've grown organically since then.
Right. So, yeah. So and first of all, I'm surprised that your beer lasted the Saturday, but we can discuss that. You managed to have a party, but there we go. But was that? I guess I mean Cambodia. Obviously, I have a picture of it. I know someone whose brother moved there 20 years ago, and just like you, fell in love with the place and is still living there, as far as I know. But
okay.
But I guess, like, is it back then? That's 10 years ago. What was the kind of the community like? Was there a separate kind of expat community and Cambodian community? Were they intermingled? Was there, because I imagine back then, as far as I understand, anyway, it was a much poorer country than it is now.
Yeah, and Cambodia is definitely one of those emerging markets that I would say Southeast Asia is the fastest growing region in the world right now. And I'd say Cambodia is probably the fastest growing country, some would argue, in the region. So when you look at the growth of this country, 10 years is like phenomenal. It's 7 to 10% GDP growth every year on year. COVID kind of course, stunted that growth, but it's come a long way. 10 years ago, of course, there was one traffic light in town. In the main capital city. 15 years ago, there were still a lot of dirt roads in the main capital city. And so we have experienced a lot of growth, and some of those growing pains have been good and some of them have been a challenge, as any change is a challenge at times. In terms of the community, though, yes, we started off mostly as an expat product, trying to find expat something that reminded us of home, trying to bring something from home into our own community abroad.
Right.
Since those years, though, I would say probably year 3, year 4, when we really started to branch out into the community, it was less about trying to bring something that was a reminder of home and more about trying to find a Cambodian voice for craft beer.
Right. And is that, yeah, so, I mean, I was obviously reading up a little before that. Like you said, it seems to have, there's been major change in the country, or at least, does that apply across the country, or is it just Phnom Penh has seen all of the change? Or, again, I'm just trying to get a picture of what Cambodia is like these days. It's obviously become a huge tourism base as well, huge tourism destination.
I mean, if you want to drill down into what the economy is, I'd say it's a three-legged economy, being agriculture, number one, tourism, and then garment districts. And so a lot of apparel, a lot of shoes and clothes, and these items have been made in Cambodia and shipped around the world. The largest export country, or the largest export purchasing power, would be the United States and the European Union. So they're buying most of Cambodian goods. And that three-legged economy is interesting because you're right, tourism is huge and it continues to grow in the hotel and the restaurant and the F&B sectors. And so that's what really props us up in the beer industry. Outside of that, and that's kind of the ecosystem of the economy. In terms of culture, there are a lot of Cambodians like to party. Cambodians like to have a good time. And one of the things that I think is endearing, Cambodians like to cheers probably every minute.
Right.
And it's one of those cultural aspects that I think is beautiful. But so if you're sitting at a table with a whole bunch of local folks, pretty much every minute they'll just tap glasses and drink. So it's kind of a recognition of, yes, I see you in the group and I want to be respectful. And there's a way you cheers as well in Asia. I don't know if you're familiar with that process.
No.
So in China and of course other Asian countries, including Cambodia, when you cheer someone, the location that you cheers in the glass is important. So if your glass is above someone else's, you're telling someone that you are above them.
Okay.
But if you take a glass and you cheers the tip of your glass below the tip of theirs, then you're showing respect and you're saying, I think you're above me or equal. And there's small aspects like that.
Okay. That sounds like it would be very difficult for me to manage after a few pints.
But yeah, I think it's I wouldn't say it's complicated. I would say that it's a beautiful way to express respect. And Cambodians are very respectful.
Okay.
And refined. So
okay. Yeah. And I suppose just coming back to the beer scene then, is it?
Yeah.
Is it a beer country? I don't know what kind of. It's obviously not wine country. So what would the normal drink be there? Is it a big macro lager dominates everything, and what would the traditional be?
That would be correct. So I would say the macro scene would be lagers, light lagers, the likes of Cambodia Beer run by Khmer Brewery or Khmer Beverages. Also, you've got Gansberg, which is very popular in the province. And so you've got different sectors of the country that have strongholds in the market. For example, the mass populace which is Phnom Penh in the city, the capital city. It's not Gansberg, but outside of the province where there's less people, Gansberg has a stronghold in the market. So it's an interesting aspect. Most recently, there's other light lagers that have hit the scene, meaning Hanuman and also Vatanak. These are locally owned. All of these are local families that have started breweries. And yeah, there's others on the scene, but those are the big ones. Angkor and Chua. Yeah.
Right. And they're all, sorry, because I wasn't expecting the local family bit on that. So are they still big macro breweries, or they're not? Like what size are they compared to?
I know those numbers, but not off the top of my head.
Okay, I'm just trying to picture, like, because when you think big macro, I mean, okay, Heineken is still family owned officially, but
Sure.
you think of the the Budweisers, Heinekens, Carlsbergs, and maybe not so much of family owned macros.
Right. I'd say the craft beer scene right now, the largest craft brewery would be 9,000 liters tanks, 3,000 liter batches. I think, and I really can't tell you the truth when I tell you these numbers, but the macro scene would probably be 50,000.
Okay.
But I can get back to you on that one.
No, it's okay. I'm just trying to get a general picture because I did read that the number of macro breweries there, and again, I'm just trying to figure out how to define it. The number of macro breweries had exploded.
Yeah, most recently there's been I want to say this very carefully. A lot of large families in Cambodia, a lot of large local families, they like to diversify, and so some of these families that have risen to power given the economic boom of the country, where I said the GDP has grown from 7 to 10% annually for the past since 1990. These families have done really well at diversifying. So they've gone from moving from cement companies to having banks to grocery stores to a brewery to and malls. And so it's not just one sector. They've kind of opened up their portfolio, and it seems very trendy for large families in Cambodia to have a brewery now.
Okay. So it's just part of the diversification. They're not brewers. It's just and then presumably it's just generally a generic lager then that they're producing. Or do they produce
some of them are brewers. Some of them actually went to formal training schools in Germany and learned the skill of the trade. Some of them have just outsourced and hired skilled individuals to come into Cambodia and take over. So, yeah.
Okay. And so the craft beer scene then, and that is that. I mean, if each of these kind of have a distribution in the provinces and that, is the craft beer scene very much limited to Phnom Penh, or is it? Do you get outside? Are there brewers outside of Phnom Penh, and can you distribute easily outside of Phnom Penh?
Definitely. So I would actually say that Kampot and Kep is another area where craft beer has grown up and done really well in recent years. Siem Reap is, I think, growing. Unfortunately, I think it's dominated by the macro scene still, but I think that's the next area where we should all focus. Phnom Penh is definitely the capital of the country and the capital of craft beer for the country, just given the mainly driven by the expat scene, but I think that spills over, of course, into the large young population. That's one aspect that I think is important to realize is that Cambodia is a young country in terms of the age of the population. The unfortunate experience of the Khmer Rouge back in the 70s created kind of a vacuum where a lot of the older adults are no longer around. And so there is a huge populace of individuals between the ages of 20 and 35 now. And so that band of age group is now up marketing from the macro beer to the craft beer. So they grew up drinking light lagers, but now they have some more disposable income because the country is definitely emerging, and they don't want to change to a wine or a whiskey. They'd rather just go up market. So we're seeing that across the board. And that's pretty important to recognize.
Okay. So I can see how that kind of growing middle class, disposable income is obviously, once you have that, you'll spend it on something nice rather than what you've had before. But are they looking, I guess, is craft beer seen as an expat thing, like a foreign thing that you aspire to be foreign, or do they look for kind of more Cambodian influenced beers? I'm kind of figuring out where in the market it is, or where in the transition it is, because there's a point when people look for validation from outside and then they slowly turn around and kind of see their traditions and histories.
Sure. I think that the first, since 2013, I'd say, again, 2, 3, 4 years into the business, it was a difficult transition to explain that this was a locally produced beer. This is not a imported beer that we're selling or tried to introduce into the market. A lot of Cambodian restaurants or individuals that I would meet, they didn't understand the concept that this was actually a Cambodian beer. And I used to tell them that, that the main ingredient in beer, this beer is 99% Cambodian because the main ingredient is the water. And so that was a joke, but at the same time true. We try to use as many local ingredients as possible. Another interesting aspect that Cambodia kind of is transitioning from, but still kind of challenged by, in the early days and even still now, draft beer was considered lesser quality. Bottled beer was always premium, was always better. And a lot of that had to do with, if you were drinking a bottled beer as a Cambodian, you could hold it with a label and be seen as drinking something that was an imported product. And so I'm drinking something that is not from Cambodia, and this kind of concept. That's shifted.
Okay.
I believe. And so, as most of us in the beer industry recognize, draft beer is considered and usually fresher, and bottled beer could be older and more oxidized and whatnot. And so I think that learning curve has happened, and I think it's education that has come from other brewers like myself and our team as well to educate folks, and try to again find that voice of Cambodian beer. And really share what that means, whether it's using local ingredients like kaffir lime leaf or jasmine or even lemongrass in some of the beers, or using local honeys. It's a nice story, but it's also true that it's important to find that voice and to share that voice, because as a brewer, and especially as a small craft brewery, you can't depend solely on the expats, and the expats aren't going to be there forever.
Yeah, so but like I said, that's kind of working out for you in terms of your market has grown beyond the expats, and you now have you have 3 tap rooms?
We've had some tap rooms, 3-4 tap rooms in the past. COVID kind of shrank us down a little bit. But yeah.
All right, okay. But those, again, from what I understand, so ask you a question for that. So what do you sell mainly in the tap rooms? Is it draft or bottles? How does that
draft? Draft all the way. Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of that is the educational piece too. For me, bottles is a risky venture still in this country for craft breweries that don't have pasteurization or a micron filter of one or whatnot. The challenge is that a lot of the macro scene has educated bar owners and managers and supervisors to keep their bottles out in the heat.
Okay.
We don't have cold storage is just not easily accessible in this country. Whether you're the end user restaurant or even your home or large corporations or large hotel chains, a lot of them don't still have walk-in freezers or whatnot. Big ones do, but and so people were leaving bottles out in the heat, and then we would look back.
Yeah. And so does that matter? So your off-site distribution to the restaurants and that, is that draft as well or bottles then, or do you take the chance?
No, I really want draft. I can control it. I can control and understand when a keg goes out. The time that it leaves the brewery, I understand when the keg comes back, or if the keg has been out for too long in my standard of quality. And so I can get a notification that says, hey, you should go check on that keg or check on that restaurant, or these kind of things. With bottles, it's an unknown. It goes out and you never see it again.
Right.
And so we don't have the ability to really understand the quality control mechanisms. All we know is that someone's going to give us a bad review, 6 months to a year after it goes outside, and who knows how it's been stored.
Yeah. And do you have to how do you have to supply the taps and the gas and all of that to there as well? You have to provide everything.
Yep. Again, a lot of restaurants and hotels and whatnot and bars. The larger macro scene has set the pace for the craft scene. And that being said, it's expected that the brewery will provide all the equipment, all the servicing, all the distribution. And so it's kind of taxing on us as a small medium enterprise, SME. But at the same time, I think we got to meet people at the market, and that also gives us an opportunity to work with people who really want our product, not just to focus on profit. And I think there's always a blend of both in every business, but we really seek out people who want our product, not just any beer. So
Okay. So you don't spend time kind of fighting for tap space, then you just find the
no,
restaurants, bars that want you. And there's
right.
enough.
I think it's a relationship piece, and I think that as we grow larger, it's more difficult to maintain that relationship aspect of business. But I think it's important because it is a new concept to locals, and we can only do it one time. You can only do it one time right.
And do you have trouble like with the macros? Because one of the big things, at least in Ireland, is the big macros, the Guinnesses, Diageos, all of that. They'll supply a lot of stuff to the bars, but it's based on exclusivity. And then even if the bar wants to do it, there is not much left for the independents.
That does happen, where there is sponsorship that breweries will give to owners of restaurants and bars, and we can't compete with that. You're right. I don't see the macro breweries really finding us as a threat. So there's times where we can kind of squeeze in. Sometimes we can ask for a favor, or we can just explore what that exclusivity means. I think that they're really trying to fight against their own market, meaning their own macro competitors, not us.
Right. So, but you don't become kind of collateral damage because they've tied up everything in the bar that way.
Yeah, sometimes. But again, that goes back to if a owner of a restaurant bar really cares about the products they're serving, they will go back and say, hey, can we renegotiate the contract? My customers really want craft beer. And unless you have craft beer in your portfolio as a macro brewery, I need to do this. And that's happened before, which is nice. Okay. Not always, but it happens.
Right. But it sounds like it's more than it does here.
Yeah. It's a small town. We all know each other.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, just on the tap room and the COVID there. I mean, we're all sick of COVID. Hopefully, though hopefully it kind of feels like it was a weird past. But you were doing a fancy thing to kind of get away or to kind of adapt to it. You had a beer forward and a tuk-tuk.
Yeah, fancy. I don't know if I've ever been called fancy. That's cool. No, I have a very, very good friend of mine who was my GM at the time, Jared, and he and I were trying to figure out how we're going to pivot. I think everybody was trying to figure out how they were going to pivot. Yeah. Sales dropped completely. Bars were closing left and right. And there was just this dark cloud, this endless dark cloud that a lot of people around the world felt. And so, you drink beer when you're happy, you drink beer when you're sad. And as long as you find some sort of community into it, that was what we were really trying to drive home. So yeah, what we did was we would do this beer bar tuk-tuk, and we called Beer It Forward. It was kind of a joke at first. What happened was I called up a friend of mine and I said, I've got a tuk-tuk, which is like a small taxi on a motorcycle, like a rickshaw. And I loaded it up with our draft system. I put 4 different beers in there and taps and everything, and hired my drivers to go around town. And I called up my buddy, Liam actually was his name, of Ireland, but called up Liam first. And I said, Liam, I'm sending over my mobile draft. I'm sending over my beer bar tuk-tuk to you. I need you to come outside with a glass. You're going to be there in 5 minutes. And when they rolled up, we gave him whatever beer he wanted that we had on tap. And after we gave it to him, we said, hey, Liam, I'm gifting you this beer. Would you like to give anybody else a beer? It's totally up to you. And if you say, no, that's okay, I'm just going to give another beer to someone else. And so Liam, we had a card, you fill out a little index card and wrote down the name, the address, and the phone number. And he paid for the next person's beer. And we drove to that next person and knocked on the door and said, hey, get you a glass. Liam bought you a beer. And so this actually worked out really well. It was interesting. It went all over Phnom Penh. to different people, and it was just bringing joy to people. It was that ray of sunshine in that dark cloud, and we were never trying to push an obligation to buy someone a beer, but everyone did, and they would buy multiple beers. We had a night where someone bought the U.S. ambassador to Phnom Penh, W. Patrick Murphy, bought him a beer, and I think as a joke, actually. I don't know, maybe he's going to read this or not. Maybe it was a joke, maybe it wasn't a joke, but they bought him a beer, and went to his house, and they delivered it, and then he actually turned around and bought other ambassadors beers too, and so it just kind of fanned out all of a sudden. Which is beautiful, because then we were doing socials for the Australian embassy and socials for the British embassy and other folks of like-minded community. And so I think hopefully it was that just a little brightness in the day that we were all just during a time period that was questionable. So
yeah, no, it sounds a great idea. I mean, so it actually brings up a question about the licensing there. How easy is it to sell beer in Cambodia? Do you need I'm not sure you could do it over here. You could just drive to somewhere. Maybe you can. I don't know.
There's a lot of regulation in Cambodia, and there's not a lot of enforcement.
Okay, so.
I don't want to say that we're obfuscating the law, the legal system. We are registered. We are paying taxes. We are doing these things. And in our industry, though, there's actually not a lot of regulation in terms of defining what we should do and what we shouldn't do. And for better or for worse, I mean, the country's been grappling with what is the legal drinking age in Cambodia. And that's, I think the UNDP, United Nations, has really tried to nail that down over the years. And I still don't think that's something that has been established. Distribution rights and taxation, that's definitely clear. But in terms of what we can and cannot do, in distribution or production or these kind of things, no.
So yeah, so it sounds like like this was maybe a loophole, but you grabbed it, and it sounds. No, so does that? I guess it. From what you're saying, it wasn't starting off as a marketing thing. It was just purely to try and keep yourself going. But it seems to have become really made you well known.
No, I think it was a blend of, we just need to cheer people up, and we have all this extra beer. So how are we going to make this happen?
Yeah, without having to get them together, I suppose. Yeah, because you couldn't get together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
no, I'm sure someone else is going to grab that idea fairly soon.
Please do. I mean, more the merrier. I think something, if it works and people are happy for doing it, steal it, take it.
Yeah. So the other question I wanted to ask you, looking, like you said, macro lager is the big, like everywhere else in the world, really, it has the majority of the market. But when I was looking through your website, you don't have any lagers on your website. You have blondes, but no lagers. Is that a deliberate decision, or?
It was part of that deliberate decision has been, we don't want to compete, or we want to be different from the other macro scene. We do produce now a Helles lager, and that was actually something we've developed recently. But initially this was something that, one, we went from, again, the stage of, this is something that reminds you of home that we're going to bring into this community. And then it was more of, well, let's try to define this for this community and make it less of an American idea or American flavor, or even European, but let's make it more uniquely Cambodian. And so now we're shifting to really trying to cater to the Cambodian palate. And so if we're creating a craft lager, which we are now, creating a craft lager, I think is that bridge. But at the same time, I think that it's the gateway beer for a lot of folks. So wheat beer also is a gateway beer for a lot of folks.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense if that's what people are drinking. You kind of give them a different version of it to get them to try your other stuff. But I suppose it also brings people into your bar, because if their friends will only drink a lager and you don't have it, then they have to go somewhere else. So
right. Well, we do. We still serve the macro beer at our bar. Cambodia beer we serve. Yeah, because just like my wife's a vegetarian, and so when we go to a restaurant and everyone as a group, and there's not an option for her, it's a challenge.
Yeah.
So, and I think Cambodia beer is the best local macro beer on the market. So,
Okay.
my personal opinion.
Okay. Yeah. So what other beers are there? Like you said, there's about 10 local macros, but like, do people like, Heineken and Carlsberg and all of those ones, do they get a look in? Asahi, whatever, do they get a look in, or is it a purely local market?
No, I think that Heineken, yes, Heineken, Guinness. I think Asia Pacific breweries are in there. I think that Budweiser is here as well in Cambodia, but I know that Heineken and Tiger and they built a huge. They developed their brewery, their third expansion or second expansion, a few years back. So yeah, the per capita is kind of crazy in Cambodia. I think that the current capacity. This may be again a rumor, so fact check me. I think the current capacity, if all macro breweries were producing at full capacity, I think every person in Cambodia would need to drink 2 liters per day.
Jeez.
I think that's where we're at right now. So what do I want to say? There's a beer war? No. I think that the market is a little oversaturated in the macro scene, and I think that it might shift for some folks in the near future. I think that's when quality at that level that the macro scene needs to be focused on, and service and cleaning lines and these kind of things. I mean, also the macro beers, you know how much a beer in Cambodia costs for the white lager?
Not a
It's
clue.
50 cents.
Jeez.
That's on the street. That's retail. That's retail.
Okay. And what's a craft lager like, or your Helles in comparison?
Retail, you're looking at 350 to 4.
Jeez, that's a big, that's a big challenge.
It's a big challenge. And so that's definitely a challenge that we have to do. But I don't think that's based on greed. It's just based on number one, supply chain management and being able to import products at a lower level and paying these taxes and doing these things that everyone has to do. We're beholden to importing a lot of the raw materials. And so we don't grow barley here. We don't grow wheat here. And that's the biggest challenge. Hops as well. So.
Yeah. But I'm beginning to wonder why you set up in the first place, because that is a huge challenge to make that difference. I mean, people complain over here when it's like maybe, there's a difference of 50 cents between a kind of a 5 and a 5.50 or something, that they're pretty much the same price almost.
Yeah, you can, if you're buying wholesale lager, you're probably paying maybe 25 cents. But I think from the economic perspective, and this is what we tell our clients, our partners who are selling our beers, it's lobsters versus hamburgers. I mean, you have to sell 100 hamburgers in a night to equal the same profit as 10 lobsters, And so if you're going to sell a craft beer, there's more margin to be had in the craft beer versus, selling a 50-cent beer and earning a quarter. So I think that needs to translate when we actually communicate the value of craft beer, and people pay for it.
It also seemed to me, though, that it kind of encourages you to stay relatively small, would it? Because if you produce more beer, you have to sell more beer, and at that price, it must get much harder.
Yeah, I think that being small, of course, you can be nimble, right? Big ships take a long time to turn. And so I think that staying relatively small is good. Also, having tap rooms, that's good to have. If you have your own POS, point of sales, your own home base, you're good to go. But yeah, I think that distributing beer also is just as important, and because you're trying to expand your community, not just become this siloed organization. All boats rise with the tide.
Actually, you've mentioned community there quite a few times. So where do you see the community there? You have your tap room, like, or you had more of them, but they obviously would, like you said, were a community team. So how do you build that community around your beer? Is it purely in the tap room? How do you build it in the restaurants outside where you're selling it elsewhere? Because it seems very important to you.
Yeah, I think that there are tap rooms. On a micro scale, we've done a lot of community programs, parent-child programs or kids art, adult art, poetry, word, these kind of things. And so keeping programs, trivia night for charity. In our tap rooms, we would do a lot of community programs. I mean, the philosophy that I hope has been, translated to the people who we work with that, work in our group. We want to be the third place. Have you ever heard this term before?
Yeah, that's Starbucks were using that, isn't it?
Oh, really? I didn't realize
I think that's where Starbucks originally wanted. At least that's what I heard anyway. That they wanted. So there now you're stolen.
Well, I like it.
I've just ruined it for you. I've destroyed it for you.
Yeah, you ruined it. Just the third place, just to define it, it's about where you spend the most of your time and usually the first, or where you want to spend most of your time. So number one is family, and it usually is. Family is number one. Number two is usually work. And the third place is the place where you find your community. It's a place where you want to hang out. Everybody knows your name, kind of the Cheers, if you are familiar with the show back in the 80s. Everybody knows your name, and you can go there. And people find it in a church. Some people find it in a bar. Some people find it in other aspects of sports. In Starbucks. But yeah, Brian, thanks for ruining that for me.
Aren't you glad you talked to me today?
Yeah, great. I mean, my whole 10 years was great until just now. Yeah. So
yeah, but it's the same thing though. Yeah, it's so you want to be. Yeah. So, but I suppose that brings it back to like your tap rooms. I always try to figure out the tap room. I see you control everything. You set the atmosphere basically, and what's acceptable. But then does that extend? Does the community extend outside of that, and how do you extend that community out there? And is that just through charitable sponsorships, or how do you make it a community around your beer? I suppose the tuk-tuk is an obvious example there. What you did on that.
I like to think that what I'm going to say is true. I hope so. At least it was when I was more involved in our direct sales. I think we've got a great sales team right now that's doing really hard and doing the best they can with what they have. And I would say that one of the words that I like to use is not customer, but partner, when we're looking at clients and people that we serve in the community. And the reason I like to use that is because it's going to be a two-way street. If you don't care about us and our product, it's going to be difficult for us to really work together. And sometimes we will work with a customer and it's a negative relationship to the start. And I'll just say, I don't think it's a good fit. Yes, we need the sales, but it's not a good fit. And because I know that we're just going to have challenges down the road. No harm, no foul. That's okay. It's really, we want people to work together. And I think some people are in a collaborative way and some people are not. So okay. That's one way that's important to me. Maybe that's happening still. I would hope. It's okay to say no.
Yeah, it's always a hard thing to do, though. I mean, it's always easier for people to say you can say no than it actually is, especially But yeah, no, but if you can stick to that gun, then it does. I think it does make a difference.
Yeah, it's about collaboration. It's about partnership. It's not just about selling widgets. It's not about I'm going to make $1 off of you.
Yeah.
And so working with that type of clientele, that's more important to me.
And what kind of just to come back to the beers themselves? So what kind of beers are kind of your big sellers, or what do you what beers do you make, and what are the sellers? Is there a split between the kind of the expat community and the local community, or is that merging?
It's definitely merging. I think natural progression of beer drinkers, we start with something light and we move to a wheat beer, then we move to a red or something, and go up to all the way to an IPA. And usually that's kind of where people don't end their road, but that's where people stay in that zone. And I would say that's the majority of craft beer drinkers have that progression. And in Cambodia, it's the same. I see that as well. It's that gateway of our probably best seller is our Khmer Honey Blonde. So it's a blonde beer with local honey, and we use it in different stages during fermentation, but use the honey in different stages of fermentation. And so it's got a local name, it's a local product, and it's close to local flavor when it comes to that gateway introduction from macro lager to craft beer. Our second best seller is probably our American Pale Ale called Centurion, and that's going to be more robust, definitely hop forward, citrusy, traditional to an American style, kind of American/Belgium style, and it's full. And so when somebody jumps from a Khmer, a blonde beer like Khmer Honey Blonde to a American Pale Ale, yeah, there's a huge difference, and you can see that. I think one of the challenges, though, that we have always faced in local community is that the flavor of hops actually tastes more medicinal to a lot of Cambodians.
Okay.
And so that bitterness doesn't always translate as a positive flavor. So we see that our maltier beers, even our stouts, that perceived bitterness, anything that's perceived bitterness is lower, is easier to approach as a local. Not always, of course. I mean, that's very generic thing for me to say, but yeah, our success has been in more malt forward beers,
Right.
So lighter, sweeter products.
Right. Any interest there in sours or anything?
In Cambodia, there's definitely like sour soups and sour mangoes and sour flavors. So it's definitely part of their culinary expression. In beer, some, but not. It hasn't really taken off
Okay.
in my mind. It's still kind of in the infancy there.
Okay, yeah, because I was just wondering, because that seems to be the progression is, like you said, start it and then starting the lagers kind of goes towards the more bitter hops, but it seems to swing around then to more saisons and then sours again. If that seems to be kind of a fairly typical thing.
Yeah, I think it could be, but it needs to be
more time
presented in the right way. I think sour is still seen by Cambodians, or not, I wouldn't say just general terms. I think for a lot of people in Cambodia, sours are seen as off, and I think that education piece needs to be translated and promoted.
Yeah, if it's still a fairly relatively new market, then I mean that they only seem to be becoming popular in, say, the States and all of that, in the last year or two. So
right,
it's a few years behind that.
Yes.
Yeah, it's interesting. Is there anybody there exporting? I presume you're not, because of size, you have enough market there. But even the macro ones there, do they export a lot, or?
The macro ones, they aren't really exporting that much.
Okay.
It's mostly domestic. I'd say probably the largest exporter of beer in Cambodia would be Kingdom Brewery, which produces craft beer mostly for contract brewers. So a lot of individuals in Singapore, Thailand, Philippines, even up into Japan and China, they're contracting Kingdom Brewery to produce their beers.
All right. That's I mean, contracts, yeah, fair enough. Like, there's a lot of really good contract brewers, but brewing them like that far away from you seems astonishing. And then they ship it back to Singapore or Japan, and it's just sold as a. Okay, that's interesting.
You got it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they've done really well in that endeavor. So it's impressive.
Right.
I think it's good. I think that that allows us to have a resource in our home country, but also supporting other countries around the region. So it's a nice blend.
Yeah, no, it's just surprising that, since you were saying like the amount of capacity among the macros there, that seems to be going unused, that they're not trying to export. But I don't know. I mean, is maybe the market, maybe the whole, the rules around each country are quite different, and it might just be it's very hard to export locally, is it? Or
Yeah, I think I'm not sure how difficult it is for export in that realm, but I think the larger breweries will need to export. And then the question is, who's going to distribute that beer? Who's going to market that beer? Which country is going to be the biggest or largest, consumer of those beers? In my mind, I think that there's a lot of spillover already from Vietnam in the craft beer market, at least, and so it's a slippery slope sometimes. I think when you try to enter another market.
Yeah. Yeah. So protect your home market first and protect what you
Yeah.
have.
Yeah.
Okay. No, this has been fascinating. Like I said, my idea of the Cambodian beer scene was non-existent. I have some idea of Cambodia, but again, I know it's changed so much in the last 10 years that anything I know is out of date.
It continues to change significantly, but it's a beautiful country. My wife and I, we lived there for 10 years and since 2013, and I'm impressed with the culture, the people, the food. I mean, it really is something that we did not know what we were getting into those years ago, and for us to stay as long as we have, we appreciate it.
And are you planning on staying longer, or do you have other plans?
Yeah, actually, we will transition out, and that means that I do have to pass the torch to someone else, and so those wheels are kind of in motion. So it's going to be hard to leave,
Right.
but at the same time, I think that change is natural, and even though I leave, I get to take all those friends and memories with me.
Yeah, well, that's always what it's about, isn't it? It's the memories.
Yeah.
It's a country that I wanted to visit for a long time. I've never had the opportunity to get there, But like I said, I've heard so much from other people, and that the friendliness is supposedly off the charts.
The land of smiles. But it's a beautiful country, and I highly recommend you put that on your list, your short list of places to go before things start to kind of homogenize in Southeast Asia.
Right.
Cambodia is still very unique. There's definitely cities that are very unique here.
Okay. Yeah, I suppose that's the problem. Like, everywhere's homogenizing, everywhere's ending up much the same. So, yeah.
Yes, we have a Starbucks that came 2 years ago. We don't have a McDonald's, so there's no McDonald's in Cambodia.
That's okay.
Franchise. What's that?
That's okay. I don't like McDonald's. It's okay.
Franchise groups are starting to come in, and that's more of a thing that happened about 5 years ago. And so, yes, that kind of homogenization is starting to creep in the small mom and pop shops. The uniqueness is starting to shift. So come to Cambodia now before things shift too much.
Okay, I'll put it on the list. Listen, Erich, it's been really interesting. Thanks a million for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you for reaching out.
Yeah, no, it's like I said, fascinating. That's what I like kind of doing about these. Like I told you off camera, like this was started as just something to do during COVID, but as you know yourself, like beer is a way kind of, as I discovered, a way kind of to discover culture and discover different parts of the world. So it's been fascinating.
Absolutely. And it brings people together.
Yep, that's true. And when I go there, though, I'll practice where I'm supposed to cheers everybody, because I'll be doing it all wrong. I'll be insulting everybody.
Sorry, we'll let you get a pass. You get a pass the first time.
All right, listen, everybody. Thanks a million. If you're watching this later, there'll be more chats next week. And thanks a million to Erich. And we leave you with that. And enjoy your beer.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks.
Thank you again. Have a good night.